let me turn to Captain James Fennell. Jim, a lot of this is the business of intelligence. I'd be very interested in your thoughts on both what we've heard from Gordon in terms of the lay of the land, and also just one point of clarification. I think John indicated that Xi was doing the purging. It sounds as though it's Xi's people who were being purged as well. If you can help clarify that, and anything you would like to say about the capabilities for war that John's just alluded to as well.
Well, thanks, Frank, for letting me be a part of this. It's an honor and privilege, and glad to be with such a distinguished group. Gordon and I frequently talked about this issue of where is Xi in his position of power, and I'd like to offer maybe an alternative view. I would direct folks after this is over, if you would like to look up an article that was written on June 25th for the website Sino Insider. It's entitled, "Xi is Losing Power, or Is He?" And in that article, they specifically addressed this issue that Gordon brought up about the PLA Daily's series of articles that talked about taking the lead in upholding collective leadership as being one of the main evidences that Xi is under duress by the PLA and the party because of the situation in China. And they basically say that the piece that was commented on, this series of pieces, were part of a group of articles, 4 of them, that were covering basically the larger issue of consciously setting an example about adhering to democratic centralism, and that collective leadership is part of this subset of, or is a subset of, the democratic centralism, which is not democracy or a check on authoritarianism, but is rather a Leninist organizational system emphasizing the unified central leadership of the party, a tool that the party has also used to curb internal corruption. And so the assessment from this writer, and I agree with this writer, is that this series of articles actually represents that the PLA is in compliance with Xi Jinping's directives rather than a challenge, and that by upholding collective leadership was part of a political campaign initiated by Xi's leadership. And the conclusion that should be drawn from that statement is that Xi's power and authority are fully intact, not diminished or in dispute. And the article goes on to address other issues that Gordon mentioned about where was he, why didn't he show up for things, and the number of times that he's mentioned in an article and all of that, and we can discuss those. But really, for me as a military intelligence person, I have to measure also what I see from the PLA. And so if I just look over the last year and I see the kinds of things that the PLA has been doing, I don't see a PLA in conflict in terms of their product. They just have had 2 aircraft carriers operating east of the first and second island chain. The Liaoning carrier operated east of the second island chain, the first time in the People's Republic of China's history. They operated 2 carriers, one west of the second island chain, one east, basically bracketing Guam. They've been active in the South China Sea. They seized Sandy Cay earlier in the year, putting their Chinese flag down, saying it's their territory when it had been our treaty ally, the Republic of the Philippines. They've also been continuing the sea trials of their 4th aircraft carrier, the Fujian, that's got this new electromagnetic aircraft launch and recovery system. They've circumnavigated Australia in the last 6 months. PLA was out in the Middle East conducting varsity operations with air-to-air refueling from their new tanker, the Y-20, with Egyptian Air Force MiG-29s. This is something that's rather remarkable. So across the board, and last year, at the end of last year, they built and unveiled a new amphibious Type 076 45,000-ton drone carrier that's going to be able to do fixed wing operations, both manned and unmanned, and also conduct amphibious operations from a single big deck. It's remarkable, and it's also equipped with the electromagnetic aircraft launch system. So across the spectrum, whether it's the PLA Navy, the Air Force, the rocket forces, space, they continue to move forward and advance on a trajectory that Xi has been in charge of for the last 13 years. And so I see that the risk that there's a kind of a cottage industry that's come up here in the last, especially in the last 3 or 4 months, because of these purging of some of these officers, is that there's this push to identify Xi as losing power, and I think there's a risk to that. And part of it is natural. We have a lot of people that are, Chinese nationals that are outside of China. They're against the Communist Party, and they're, rightly, they dislike Xi, and so they're self-affirming and self-perpetuating a view that is almost aspirational in some senses. I don't disagree that there are problems. We just had another, on the June 27th, we had another Vice Admiral, Lee Han-jun, the Chief of Staff for the PLA Navy, was sacked. This is another admiral that's been sacked, but the China Maritime Studies Institute up in Newport came to the conclusion that the removal of Admiral Han-jun would suggest that Xi believes he can burn through a tremendous amount of talent to make the PLA into a force he envisions. If Xi continues to feel he can afford this price, then we must consider the possibility that a degree of military leadership churn is priced into his approach to building a world-class Navy, and I would say the PLA in general. And then the last thing I would say is that there's some risk to this kind of a view of that Xi is under pressure and he's going to fall apart, because it feeds this idea that it's Xi, anti-Xi perspective versus anti-Chinese Communist Party. And so we kind of fixate on Xi and we forget that we got to be worried about the Chinese Communist Party. If Xi goes away, are we going to get somebody that's going to be different? That somebody's going to have a different objective? I don't think so. We also have to worry about the risk that this means for our government agencies, our businesses, Wall Street. Will they continue to invest heavily in building things that, that are providing funds and resources to the Chinese Communist Party? And then what does this kind of thinking do for the international community's view of support for defending Taiwan? So I think it's a healthy debate. It's a good debate. I'm a bit concerned, not when Gordon brings it up, because Gordon is an expert on these things and I trust him. And especially on the economic arena, I think there's a lot of pressure on Xi right now. But it's in terms of what it means for the PLA and this decade of concern where Xi is going to be faced between now and 2030, 2035, of making a decision on whether or not to use the military to bring Taiwan under their control, because the non-kinetic methods of trying to get Taiwan under control, whether it was economic or information or cognitive warfare, or those things, if those things don't bring Taiwan under their heel, they're going to be facing a decision matrix in Beijing and Zhongnanhai that says we got to make a decision to use the military. And as time goes on, up till about 2030, if they haven't resolved the Taiwan issue, there's going to be pressure to use the military. And every day we continue to see them practice to do that, or as Admiral Papero says, to rehearse to do that.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much. Captain Fennell has made a number of points that I'd like to get others' thoughts on, maybe as anybody. You've had the ongoing, several of you have mentioned this, the ongoing underwriting of our mortal enemy by Wall Street. As recently as May, this deal with cattle, for example, CATL. You've got the president enthusiastically supporting Iranian oil sales to China. You've got Israel being, it seems, told it can't decisively defeat its enemies and ours in another theater, yes, but allies of China, notably the Iranians. Is your sense, as Grant seems to be, that this is creating a sense of unease on the part of people that we are counting on to be important partners in resisting Chinese aggression?
Well, I think that's always a risk, Frank, but I think clearly this administration is turning back to what they did in the first administration, at least in terms of comparing them to the Obama, Biden, or even the Bush or Clinton years. So I think in that sense, I think people are more reassured, but there are a lot of questions. I see a lot of folks down in Australia are really having concerns right now about the AUKUS agreement, and there's a lot of reporting coming out about senior members in the Pentagon saying we're going to do a review of AUKUS, and it's being interpreted, along political lines, but there's a lot of talk there about, is America going to stay consistent? Obviously, what Grant and John did in Korea and that election. So there's questions out there. But on the other hand, America is stepping up. It's a balancing act. The president's got domestic concerns, getting the bill that they're voting on, hopefully, here in the next, before July 4th, I think is what the president wants. But the bottom line is there's domestic concerns that he has to balance off with and try to maneuver. So I'm not as critical about the short-term actions. I think we've talked before about what happened on the strike on Tehran and the kind of signal that sends. The fact that we used B-2s as diversion into the Indo-Pacific was a signal. So I think in that sense, people are reassured, that our allies are reassured that they know that we have a president that's not unwilling to act when he needs to. The question is, are we going to be able to deter Xi, whoever comes in, if Xi were to fall? I mean, if Gordon's right, if Gordon's right and Xi falls, then as we've been discussing and Brian mentioned, who are we going to get? And will they even be worse or will they be less? I don't know. But the system, the Chinese Communist Party and the Central Military Commission have built a pretty formidable force. And we need to be preparing ourselves for how do we deter them and how do we defeat them if we get in a fight here in the next 18 months. I was watching Kyle Bass on another podcast this week saying that he believes that in the next 18 months is the most critical time because it's about the time that we need, that the Pentagon is saying that they need to be able to upgun some of the critical systems that they need in AI and in drones and unmanned systems and things of that nature. I think we need more time when it comes to building capital ships and other things of that nature. Our stockpiles are depleted. So Xi is aware of that. Xi's aware of his own demographic challenges and an aging society and things of that nature, and his own economic vulnerability, again, that Gordon has documented very well. So we have a limited time set here to influence them. And that's the real challenge is, are we going to be able to do that and give the people of China some kind of hope that they're not going to be under the jackboot of the Chinese Communist Party? Because I believe, even though there's, the party's there and the party may replicate itself with somebody similar to Xi, there are a lot of Chinese there that don't like what happened in COVID. They didn't like being locked down and, and welded into their apartments and things of that nature, and the restrictions that they have. So I think the question is, how do we provide an alternative view to those folks that they can feel comfortable in knowing that there's another way? I'm not saying we lead a counter-revolution. That's up to them. But if we can at least provide them some hope, like we did with the dissidents in the Soviet Union during that Cold War, we know what they said. We know what Solzhenitsyn said, that when they saw President Reagan get up and speak, it generated hope and resistance from people in Soviet Union against the Soviet communists. We want to do the same for the people in China.
Yeah, this is, again, back to you, Karen, a freedom issue. One of the things that I must say